This episode of Why We Bleep is sponsored by Signal Sounds. Since November 2022, I've been living in a cave filled with smoke. I wandered in there looking to create a metaphorical synthesizer and emerged 7 months later, having stapled a doorbell circuit to a plank of wood. It only makes 2 sounds, one of which is ding, the other of which is dong, and I don't see that I can drag out a whole 2-hour live show from just that. So, dishevelled and aromatic, I quietly let myself into the back door of a local solicitor's office while everyone was on lunch, and made use of an unattended computer in order to order a viable alternative from signalsounds.com. Did you know that Signal Sounds are now the exclusive UK retailers for the psychogeographical beat poetry jazz insanity of Seat Lombard performance instruments? It being ever thus, I ordered a few tocantes, a synthesizer designed to be played in a cave, and I'm looking forward to cracking open a cold one, touching the hairy capacitor, and hoping nobody wanders in to have a wee. I also ordered a Groove Synthesis third wave synth and a 2,000 metre extension cable. So if you're looking for a synth that has red lights, visit signalsounds.com. That's signalsounds.com. Why We Bleep is also sponsored by thonk.co.uk. Are you looking to save money while acquiring interesting new desktop synths and modules? Did you think that DIY synths are for extremely hardcore people who live in houses made entirely of 555 timers? Well, I got news for you. The DIY synth scene has something for every skill level, including absolute beginner. Anyone can make something after watching a 2-minute video on how to solder. One of the best-selling brands at Thonk is Bifaco, a large and high-quality range great for beginners with their DIY Eurorack 101 series. With Bifaco, you can get straight into building and be making music before you know it. And if you want to get into how circuits work, there's the Erica Synths es.edu system. Perfect, because each module also is a little mini course on how it actually works. Something like the Music Thing mini drive is super affordable, and you end up with a working module in 20 minutes if you have a little bit of experience, or at worst case, maybe an hour if it's your first build. So DIY is for everyone, even yours truly can do it. And I don't know how the bloody hell circuits work, but I can build things, and so can you. So check out thonk.co.uk for desktop synths and Eurorack modules you can build yourself. Now on with the show. Why? Hello. Do you remember me? My name was Mylar Melodies, and once upon a time, I had a podcast called Why We Bleep. And I do again. Yes, I have some very good news for you, which is you're going to be hearing more from me, and I'll tell you why, and also why you haven't been hearing from me. And the answer to that is because when I was in my 20s, which I'm not anymore, it was feasible to just spend evenings and weekends making videos and podcasts and just generally building things for pure whimsy and fun. And then as time moved on, those things started to actually pay their way a bit and be worthwhile to do financially, as well as because they were the things I wanted to do. But then time has passed, and as full-time work continued and fatherdom expanded, 5 months ago, we had our second kid, a very beautiful boy, and he is very sweet, but his presence has brought things to a head. You really can't give away your evenings and weekends when you have so little energy or time to give. And throughout all my creative life, that is building YouTube videos and being sort of visible on the internet, you may not know, but I have had a full-time job the whole time. I have been doing full-time work in order to bring the sweetbread. And then this has been like a side hustle. Well, it's not anymore. because I've quit my job. Yes, this is now my job because I can't do 2 full-time jobs, or what should be 2 full-time jobs. And that's why I've not been able to do podcasts. And so I decided there was enough work doing kind of some demos and producing this and hopefully growing my Patreon that I can justify doing this. And so that is what I'm doing. And so you are going to see Why We Bleeps regularly once more. And so I will invite you very shamelessly to consider sponsoring on Patreon if you enjoy Why We Bleep and want to help support its continuation. We obviously do have ad reads, and I have got a third one at the end to help out some friends at Modcaf, who Ben is worked at Anderson's and is involved with this amazing event, which you'll hear about after the episode. But yeah, Patreon is kind of the main way that Why We Bleep is funded. So if you do enjoy it, I really would beg you to consider signing up at any level. It will help massively. And the more that grows, then the more I can focus on this side of it and, tutorials and other things that I'm not directly being commissioned to do. And so, a podcast. This episode is a conversation with the absolutely wonderful Ryan West, aka Rival Consoles. And I actually spoke to Ryan quite some time ago. This episode has been sitting just on ice until I could actually get the time to produce it. And so I spoke to him like many months ago, a good many. And in this conversation, it's obviously about his latest album, which is called Now Is. And it is a beautiful, it really exemplifies his kind of sound. It's this sort of wonderful, dramatic, arpeggiated, warm, fuzzy synth music, in short, with just a kind of gorgeous, dusty whole world. When certain types of music just have like a world, you've just totally done your own little thing in here. Like you've been working on this for some time. And so that is what we talk about, the process of making music and how he makes his music, how he gets that like signature sound, that kind of warm, fuzzy, arpeggiated, crunchy crunch. He was in his studio in London. And if you're watching this on YouTube, then there is a visual component to it too. Ryan was filmed or videoed, I have the video of him talking. So if you are watching on YouTube, if you want to watch it again, if you're listening on the podcast on audio, then you can actually see Ryan in his studio and we chat about stuff. So yeah, much to talk about. And since you've waited so long, I probably shouldn't take up any more of your time. Once again, we continue Why We Bleep with this conversation with Rival Consoles. Thanks.
So I'm in my flat, which is a 2-bedroom flat, and the second bedroom is my studio, basically. And I've always worked like this. I've always just had home studios. I've never had a studio elsewhere. To be honest, I'm not sure how much you can see from this feed, because before it looked like you could see more. I don't know if you can see this.
I can just see that looks like, it's a nice reel to reel, like a Nagra or something.
That's right. Yeah. And I'm just making sure because I can't see probably what you can see.
The width. Yes.
But basically, it's just a relatively small room. It's packed with gear that some of which can be seen, some of which can't be seen. And this is where I've been making music for the last 4 years.
Yeah.
But like I say, my previous studio spaces would have been similar. And I've tend to work like this throughout my life.
Whereabouts are you based?
So I'm in Peckham. Well, Peckham, East Dulwich, Southeast London.
Where are you from originally?
I'm originally from Leicester.
Yeah. You sounded apologetic. Don't apologise.
Not apologetic, but I mean, we won the Premier League.
Exactly. Come on.
But yeah, so I identify more with being in London, though, which sounds very cliche and ridiculous, but Because I've spent my whole life kind of wanting to be around people that make. Not that people don't make in Leicester, but obviously in London, it's very easy to find yourself around people that are makers of all kinds of art. So I feel very much like I am a Londoner in that context.
How long have you lived there?
I think 12, between 12 and 15 years now.
Yeah.
Because I moved straight after university, because I did study actually in Leicester, and that was a music related course.
I did a similar thing, not music course, but I'm from like the countryside in Yorkshire, and then I went to university in Middlesbrough, which was as great as it sounds. Although I had fun. But then I went to London, and I went to London for like 10 years, and I've just moved back to Leeds. But like, yeah, I lived in London for like a full decade and a bit, and I totally know what you mean. It's that sort of desire to, at least speaking personally, it was the desire to go to where the life was, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot
like,
going on.
Yeah.
Although, to be honest, Leeds is got a good energy, a lot better than Leicester from what I've experienced in terms of music industry and sort of, I don't know, more left field creativity.
I mean, but then would you be making music when you were in Leicester? When did you start making music?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, because I started making music really young in a way. I was playing the guitar when I was 12. And because I'm the kind of person that tried to run before I could walk, I was immediately trying to make music, trying to compose. So, yeah, I guess probably for 8 years, I tried to make music in Leicester. It would have been terrible, but
when you say you were trying to make music with guitar and stuff, like how
in bands?
Yeah,
in bands, like kind of nothing special bands, but indie, left field, post rock, shoegaze bands, but with lots. I mean, in a kind of messy way that most people have done. But way before I even started to make music with electronic, devices, computers, etc. Whereas I guess now maybe it's more likely that if you're younger, you just immediately walk into the world of producing with a computer because it's a little bit more common now. But for me, I was very slow into electronic music, which probably is helpful to an extent. But yeah, that's kind of my way into that.
I mean, like, were you using tons of pedals? And when I think of shoegaze, I think of like
I wasn't that kind of a person, but yeah, I was. It's super. I've always been into composing on a really kind of fundamental level. So to begin with, I wasn't kind of smart enough to think, oh, actually, the production aspect of changing sound is integral to composition. I was, for a long time, just thinking about chords and melodic ideas and rhythmic ideas. So yeah, for a long time, it would have been very stripped back. Though obviously there were pedals like delay pedals, distortion, reverbs, and stuff. But I wasn't the kind of person that had this huge setup. And still to this day, really, even though I've got quite a lot of equipment, I have quite a stripped back approach to things, including like just constantly using stock plugins, for example. I'm not the kind of producer who insists on having hundreds of UAD plugins, which are I'm at the same time, by the way, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that or that's worse or that I'm better. I'm just saying that for some reason I tend to gravitate towards quite rudimentary approaches. I think I get a little bit confused when there's too many technical procedures going on, and I try to focus on the idea of the music if possible, and even that's it's easier said than done.
Well, yeah, I mean, your music, it feels very like I was going to say cleansed, that's the wrong word, but it's condensed in the sense that it's like, especially when I'm listening to the new record, it's like textured, but it's very carefully considered. And I get the sense that you've either taken a lot away or you've just got the smarts to know when to stop and go like, these few elements sounding as they do, full and like with the bass is obviously underpinned and everything it's like a hefty kind of sound, but it's simple, I suppose, is the key. So it's knowing how to do that. It's very non-trivial.
There is a lot of discarding of stuff, that's for sure. Because it takes me a long time, I think, to understand what is important and what's not important when I'm making music. obviously, like, there are things that you just do and you think, oh, that's good, and then I like that, and then I'll build around that. But when it comes to really understanding the whole composition, oh, knocking the mic, it takes me a long time to understand. So there's lots of experimenting with discarding stuff and deleting stuff, and even bringing stuff back. Just the standard things that everyone is doing. But I do, like you just explained, I try to reduce things down to a point of like clarity. I basically like music to not be hiding behind anything, like behind technique or power almost. Like I kind of like it to be quite vulnerable, so that it's just the idea, which is a bit ridiculous. But for some reason on this record, I did it more than ever. And so, and not to say that I would always make music like that, but on this record, I seem to want to make things quite naked, and to the point where there are pieces on the record where they're almost kind of collapsing because they're almost too exposed, which is quite interesting, but obviously not necessarily something you should do. But there's a lot of, just, I don't know, just exploring very, very fundamental ideas about making music and just seeing what happens. But it's not really technical. It's more just almost the basics of composition, really, that I'm still interested in, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It feels intuitive.
Yeah, hopefully, that's what I'm trying to do. And yeah.
What do you, when you're making this record, like, what are you surrounding yourself with? I suppose I mean from like, when you're making a track on nowadays, like, what is the setup? And do you have just like one bit of gear next to you, or do you pick a few things, or like how do you approach like writing a track, and especially like what you give yourself to do? And by which I mean like the gear that you plonk next to the computer.
I mean, with this record, because it was predominantly made during the whole pandemic, there's just a huge amount of experimentation, and there was no agenda to have a smart or elegant workflow. I was just, for example, I used to have a drum kit in here, which is not in here right now, but where I'd just be constantly recording, messing around basically on a drum kit with 2 mics, 3 mics, recording with the Glyn Johns technique, just doing like basic things and then weird things. And that applies to everything else that I do. So like sometimes I'll be doing stuff with the modular synthesizer, which I might just make one particular ambient sound that I then use. I never really tried to force anything. I'm just like making over a long amount of time. And then sometimes things are born out of that really excite me and interest me. With the pedals as well, I'll show you actually, because I've got some pedals here. I don't know if you can see this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can see
a little pedal world here. But it could be the case that a whole day I just spend exploring certain sounds, going through one pedal and then back into the computer, and that could be a total waste of time, or it could be there were times when I created some really, really beautiful, subtle background sort of behaviors that exist on tracks. Like in A Warning, for example, there are some like background ambient sounds which are so detailed and like articulated, but they're in the background. So there's just constant exploration and making. The Rev 2, which is, I put there just so it can be seen, because normally actually it's in front of me.
Yeah.
Because I have a desk where the keyboard's right in front of me, because I'm playing that all the time as a synthesizer or sometimes as MIDI. But that's obviously, as I've spoken about many times in interviews, been quite integral to the general synthesis that I use on record. There's, I don't know if they're in
the question. Yeah, I can.
There's other stuff like the Arp Odyssey, the Korg reissue of the Arp Odyssey, and
the Moog Matriarch.
The Moog Matriarch, though, although I don't think was probably used too much on the record, because that might have come along towards the end.
There were sort of sounds on there that I was like, that sounds Moogy, in the sense of
there might be some bass
you've got, which may not be tones. A Moog, which is to say, it's just kind of what I associate. Like you've got this, like, it's a great use of like the really simplistic, like where you can really just feel like the basic waveform, a really nice like bit of drive, and like a little bit of white noise that's just creates that sort of, I know it's not like a chunky sound that is, it's it's so nice to hear it articulated in this way. And then, as you said, like the textures, there's definitely tunes there where it's, I forget the name of the tune, maybe the one that you mentioned, where it's like, it feels, I was listening to it, I was like, is that sort of shortwave radio? You know, like it sounded almost like shortwave radio, like static, and you almost can hear voices in it.
Yeah, there are some like phone recordings of the outside world that feature on a few tracks, which have a kind of weird ghostly, almost like radio recording. They do, and there are probably voices there in the distance, but there's just a lot of very, very simple processes going on. But because obviously it's made over a certain amount of time and a lot of things have been explored and discarded, you're left with quite specific things that are interesting to me and hopefully to the listener.
It felt when I started listening to it, I was like, this is very, like, you've programmed all of the sounds, as in like you've like created the drum sounds, like you've synthesized them as well. But then as the record progresses, and it feels very synthetic, but in a organic, fuzzy, sort of warm way. And then like there are like those little threads of real things, quote unquote, that just start to like sneak in. And then there's like actual drums.
Yep.
Later on, it's sort of interesting. There's that sort of, it starts very synthy and it feels like the real world sort of like cracks its way into the mix.
Yeah, which is something that I've kind of done across a few records really, is blending and trying to just stretch the two worlds, like the electronic world, synthesized world, and the acoustic world. Obviously, they're deeply blurred, but it's not like a super intellectual choice. It's just I prefer things to be quite naturalistic, even when they're synthetic in a way, because obviously you can if you view my music against a singer-songwriter, it will sound extremely synthetic, but if you view it against techno, it sounds very organic. So there's always this perception that's shifting depending on what it's played against or what it's surrounded by. But I tend to prefer the middle ground because it seems very creative there, where you can point in either direction. But yeah, I don't know if I was rambling on then.
No. Tell me about the Prophet as well, because why is that important to you?
I mean, I don't know really. It's just crazy because I bought it without ever trying it, and I knew about it and I heard the sounds of it, which is why I bought it, and I liked some of the pad sounds. But for some reason, I just massively connect with it and have done for the last 10 years, to the point where it actually kind of shocks me, even if I don't work with it for, let's say, 2 months, and then all of a sudden I just mess around with something. I just find immediately that I can start making music with it in a way that I can't with any other synth, plug-in or hardware-wise. And I'm not sure exactly why that is, because I'd used many synths before this, both in hardware and plugin world. But there's just something about, I don't know really. It's just kind of strange. And it still continues to this day, like me being interested in using it. Because if, for example, I'm the kind of person that if I stopped liking the results, I would just stop using it immediately. I'm not trying to create a connection with anything. I just want things to work. But it turns out there is a kind of a thing going on where I tend to be interested in the results that come out of it quite quickly. I can't really explain the detail. I mean, I could show. No, can I even show? Because it's such a subjective thing, obviously. Because I could show something that I think is interesting, and then other people could think they could do that in 50 other ways, and it's of no value. But for me, I feel I can do, even, for example, let's say it's just an arpeggiation. Just the velocity aspect of the arpeggiation on the Prophet 8 is really amazing to me, that you can play 3 notes really quietly and they're almost not there, and then 1 note loudly, and then you start hearing this weird polyrhythm, and then add another note loudly, add another note medium volume. You get an extremely complicated rhythmic pattern that you can't really do on many hardware synths, because the other notes, even though you played them, are not really present. So you get accents on all these, so I'm interested in just the simplicity of that, and that's amazing on the Prophet 8, or that's the Rev 2, by the way, obviously. But I have both. But things like that. Also, I was on, I should explain this actually. The Rev 2 the whole time is always going through this
analog heat.
The analog heat, and also, and Yeah. And
For the
also,
viewer, this is I've got analogy as well.
also through the Autobahn reverb.
Yeah. I have not got one of those, but I've heard Bim Bam Boom, isn't it?
That's right.
The
Yeah.
various ones.
Although I've only got this, but yeah, I've heard amazing things about, especially the saturation one. But for some, I just like the heat going into this reverb, and nothing fancy really. It's just changing the color of the synth.
Because there is a lot of I was reflecting. I was like, delay and reverb are they're definitely omnipresent. But of course, there's all this drive as well. So it's sort of
there's a lot of saturation. I mean, I'm also, even though I showed the Autobahn, I'm a big sort of user of plate reverbs. Valhalla plate is often used with the synth sounds that I use.
Valhalla plate specifically, or any of the.
I mean,
what is it about the
almost 100% of the time. I don't know. I just find that I like the slight metallic quality of it. I mean, I used to use spring reverbs quite a lot, actual spring reverbs. I haven't actually got it here right now, but I do, because I've lent it to a friend. But I have the Space Echo 555, which is the rack mount version of the famous orange Space Echo. I'm just saying that just in case no one knows. The spring on that is amazing, and I've got various other spring reverbs. But yeah, so I do like the kind of metallic, slightly gritty, edgy reverb, versus a really glorious digital altiverb or convolution reverb.
Or like a chorusy sort of one. Although I know that Sean from Valhalla, which I've spoken to you before, he's insane about chorusing and modulation on his reverbs as well. But I wonder if plate is less so. Maybe.
I mean, for example, I don't really use the kind of what's the modulation aspect of it, which I guess creates more of a chorus. But it does seem to have a chorusy tone in general, I guess, versus a really natural room reverb. But I just like, for example, on Now Is, the actual song, that middle break where it's like this ridiculous solo that sounds quite metallic, that's just 100% wet signal improvisation on the Prophet 8. That sound dry is stupid, totally stupid.
Yeah.
But it sounds, I mean, it sounds ridiculous to say it sounds incredible, but it sounds amazing and interesting when it's 100% wet plate.
Yeah.
To me. Because it sounds very euphoric and shimmery, and it's got this metallicness. It's got a certain color to it. But there are lots of examples on this record, on previous records that I've made, where I've used 100% wet plate signal for melodic sounds which should be at the front but actually are in the back. For example, on Slow Song from many years ago, there's a sort of Fender Rhodes melodic line. It's 100% wet in the back, even though it's the main melodic line. I like doing things like that, which are a bit, they're obviously testing the listener a little bit. Yeah, they're kind
whatever that means.
I mean, it's funny because obviously almost all experimentations kind of existed, but things like that still remain not that common when you push the melody right to the back, and there's nothing else. It is the main melody, the bits at the back. I really like doing that, and I've been doing that for quite a few years. But I almost will always do that with a plate reverb, and not just the Valhalla one. I've used the Sound Toys Little Plate. Is it Little Plate?
Yeah, Little Plate is awesome. Actually, Little Plate is, especially when you whack the time up to like infinity, becomes a beautiful synth reverb.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's got this kind of, there's a slight metallic darkness to it, but that's definitely something that I do. It's funny because people sometimes on social media comment about the reverbs, thinking there are these incredibly complicated, meticulous procedures, but they're just often just a really basic reverb slapped on. And also, by the way, I use like Ableton stock reverb all the time. I'm not just using the plate, but I'm quite quick with just slapping on effects and just seeing what works. If that doesn't work, getting rid of it. I don't really have a really elegant workflow of, I must use this and in a certain way. Even, for example, every time even though I just admitted that I use plate reverb a lot, I just start from scratch every time and just dial it in a little bit because I know exactly what I want, but I don't really have like a procedure in terms of a preset.
Like a template that you make music from.
I never use template. I'm not against them. Obviously, some people use them, but I don't have a template for anything. I always start with a blank, which is a bit, I don't know if I should probably have a template, by the way. I don't think
I've seen some people be really productive with them, and I've always been slightly jealous. I don't start from templates either. Although, actually, that's not strictly true because I do have like Valhalla Delay and like maybe Valhalla Room, I think.
on a return.
Just on returns A and B.
Yeah. I think. I mean, I almost don't class that as a template because I think of return channels as being so. But even then, I don't do that.
Yeah.
But I probably should. But I'm actually, even though I do use, there are examples on this album where I've got like 7 return channels.
See, I was always about to say, like, if I made a template, it should just be to have more returns.
Yeah.
I'm often lazy is the wrong word, but Valhalla stuff, as you know, is just very satisfying, especially like the delay, and it's very easy to just be like, that'll do, and then, but obviously you can create so many different textures and colors if you have different types of spot reverbs and things.
Yeah.
I do wish that Ableton had the ability to drop effects onto clips themselves and bake them in, onto like single hits. I know that you can do that on Presonus Studio One, but
I used to do that in Cubase a lot.
Yeah.
But it makes sense. Yeah, I've got friends who have like 8 different reverbs as return channels, and they're all different colors. So obviously you can just start throwing stuff into this world of different color, and that makes a lot of sense and is very creative. But I think because that's probably a more of a mixer's perspective. When I'm making, I'm so lost often, or either lost or obsessed with an idea, that I don't have that kind of pragmaticism to focus on something like that. I'll probably just do it, but I'll do it in a more clumsy, quick, negotiated way.
Yeah.
Because I'm either basically not interested or obsessed.
Or you're like, you're so focused on what you're trying to do. It's just like, you know what you want?
Yeah.
I know that
well,
feeling.
Not always, but I mean, it's a varied thing. But yeah, I mean, I can know how to get to a certain point, but it doesn't mean that point was the right thing, I guess. I don't know.
And by the way, when you're starting to write something, you're like, it sounds like you were saying that it comes from experimentation. It's not like you're doing the dishes and you hear a tune. It's, I want to make music today, and so I go and sit and some piece of equipment that you just happen to want to like mess with, and then you just start recording and ideas come, and then it's an additive, iterative process after that initial idea. Is that right?
I mean, there are times when I have very specific conceptual ideas. Like Recovery was very like a preconceived idea that I wanted to carry out. In general, though, yeah, it's more just because I find that when I do have specific ideas, they often don't really do anything that interests me. So I just basically don't have an attitude of forcing something to work. I just like to experiment with things and stumble across things. But that doesn't mean that once I start doing something, I don't have very like conceptual ideas about where it should go and why it should do X, Y, Z. I'm just trying to think, because I make so much music that I can actually forget aspects of the way that I work. Because I am quite outrageous with like making, by the way, in a way that's like wasteful. Well, I make huge amounts of things, and obviously most of it is of no value and doesn't interest me. But it's just I have a kind of attitude where I just make.
You mean you don't judge, you just make?
Well, I mean, obviously, like you want to make things that you like and move and things that move you and things that you care about. But I for a long time, for the last like 5 years, I've got into the habit of just making, even when I'm not in the mood, almost just making. And it can be anything. It can be fleshing out a whole composition in like half an hour or an hour. It can be just concentrating on like an effect, concentrating on a melody, all the different aspects of making music. And then maybe that can be reused a month later or a year later or never. It's just a constant, it's almost like research really for me, where it's just, I'm constantly exploring stuff on different scales. And then, yeah, obviously the stuff that interests me ends up making it into compositions potentially. But even if things don't get used, that often you learn from them, or you learn more about things that you like or don't like in the process. But yeah, in terms of starting, it's on this record. I mean, like Vision of Self for example, which is important to me on this record, as soon as I heard this aesthetic appear, this like delayed hypnotic aesthetic, I just thought, oh, I can make music with this immediately. And that might have been 1 in 100 things that have happened in the last month. You know, it wasn't like I don't think that very often, but I was immediately excited by just the behavior of the way that synth sounds and the way that it opens. Although that did take me over a year to make, by the way, which sounds ridiculous. And that's probably because like I say, I kind of get confused when I'm making sometimes because I have too many ideas and I'm not always sure which is the right path. And by the way, when I say too many ideas, I don't mean, oh, I've got loads of amazing ideas. I just mean I have lots of kind of deviation, like simple deviations away in different manners. So I get kind of confused sometimes. Even for example, Running on this album, I probably made like 40 full versions of that track.
Wow, right.
And they can be very, very simple. It might just be the second half is changing 30 times. And some are much heavier, some are much lighter, some are a little bit more thoughtful, some are more basic. You know, this kind of thing. And that's the danger of working with computers is if you have this attitude, you can easily just create many different versions. And
I'm just thinking how you actually like catalog and stay in check with them, especially also you mentioned like coming up with lots of ideas. I read an interview, God, who is it with? Oh no, mine's gone blank. It'll come to me. But he said he was like, the smart thing is just export every session, export everything, because otherwise you end up with like, you know, Radcliffe 5 Ableton Live set and like, you know, hundreds and hundreds of them and no idea of what is what. I guess my question is how do you stay organized and not lose the good ideas, keep them accessible?
I do get a little bit lost, but because I'm quite obsessive.
Sounds helpful in this instance.
I mean, I tend to be just on top of things because if I'm into the idea, I am always listening, by the way, to the different versions, and I do change my mind. For example, on Running, I did make more ambitious versions of the song, which I then turned my back on and went back to a more sort of naturalistic, subtle version because I found that listening to the more ambitious versions 50 times, 100 times. I'm listening, by the way, all the time. I'm listening a lot to my music. It's crazy, really, and not just in the studio, but when I'm out. Mainly when I'm out, really, to try and learn from it. But it over listening over a long period, you find that sometimes you can sense that something's being forced, and the composer's forcing you to think a certain thing. And sometimes that can be good, sometimes it can not work. So in this particular example, I chose something which was far more understated and sort of natural. So you kind of you say no to like excitement, but maybe it's more moving in the long term, which is a big risk. But there's lots of
Sorry, I was going to say, but obviously it's one thing to listen to a track in isolation, but if you're considering its function as part of a record, then it can be very different. And I don't know if you're saying that you will also, like sequencing albums, of course, a big question. It's just like that, you know, how do you do that? And do you then therefore go back to other versions and be like, oh, actually this version fits here better?
Yeah, basically, because it is a mess. But it's an ongoing thing. It's just, like I say, research is probably the best way to describe it, because if you spend 6 months, for example, listening and making in the final stages, you can lose your mind, but also you do start to get a strong sense of the general average of the way that things relate to each other. Of course, this is all subjective, and you can have other people's subjective opinion, which is valid as well. But I think certain things do tend to rise to the surface as being more valid to you. And it's just, for me, I spend a long time, it takes me a long time, like I say, to get to reach the point of like a better understanding of the ideas. And that's just the way I've tend to have worked for the last sort of 5 to 10 years, really. I mean, and I'm not even forcing me being like this, by the way. It just turns out this is kind of the way that it's being done. Because obviously I would prefer if I was really, oh yeah, this just works, and then this and this and this. But for me, it turns out that I'm much more, it's more like thinking out loud, and I'm responding to the thinking out loud. but yeah.
I mean, it's like, personally speaking, I make music in a reactive way as well. And what you were describing about having the germ of an idea and then seeing where it takes you, it's how I write music as well. I mean, I think for a lot of people, then it's a sense of retroactively trying to work out not what you were going to say, because you don't necessarily know, but as you say, like just seeing what does the tune want, what would work there. And it's like, I mean, I've described it like sculpture before. It's like you've got the big block and you chip away and you sort of look at it sideways. Oh, it could be that actually, and maybe that's what I'm trying to sculpt, and then eventually arrive at it. But I guess it's that sense of I'm impressed by the organization, and it sounds like you're
not that organized.
Well,
there's a lot of chaos.
You get there. Is the point. You get there, and it's. But also, I think there's that kind of lesson, and I don't know. There's a quote somewhere that someone will know. Is the whole thing that what's the word, like fake artists sort of sit around mulling, waiting for inspiration, but like real artists just show up and do the work. It's that sort of, which is, I think, is fair, quite honestly, because it is true. I think what you're saying is that you literally just sit your bum down at 9 a.m. maybe every day, and like, I'm going to create stuff.
There's huge amounts of just work. Yeah.
Do you literally work, like, do you have like set hours that you give yourself?
No, not really. But I would say that over the last 3 years, it's been pretty ridiculous. Like it can be like 8 to 10 hours every day.
What time do you start?
Well, because I don't really like to listen to like sound super early, so it can be like 10, 11 a.m. Yeah. But it's more the case that not only am I making every day or have been, it's more that even when I'm not making, I'm listening. So there's just a huge amount of kind of paying attention to the thing. And that, and by the way, this can obviously be detrimental to the practice as well. I'm not saying if you work this hard and if you pay this much attention, it's good, because there's a lot to be said for stepping away and having absence of being involved with the making process. But for some reason, I've gravitated towards being very sort of actively involved in the making and the listening all the time. I mean, of course, the pandemic probably made things a little bit more extreme in everyone, because everyone kind of retreated into themselves a little bit more, maybe like in an introverted way. And people that make music like me are already probably quite introverted.
Yeah, no, I definitely identify with that.
So there's a healthy, everyone's got a different balance of how to approach these things. But yeah, and to be honest, actually moving forward in the future, I would actually prefer to not be like this. I would prefer to actually be a little bit more relaxed and less extreme about how much time is spent on things, because I do think you obviously gain a lot from obsessing and spending a lot of time with something, but you can, like I say, you can confuse yourself and lose focus. Not because the ideas aren't even good, but more just because it's just too much information. That's kind of something that I'm thinking about as I move forward, is to sort of reduce how much actual information is there so that I can understand what exists even better.
It's like, it's that thing also, if you're too close to something. I mean, I know listening fatigue is a big issue, and there are people advocate getting up every hour and going for a walk away from the music in order to reset your objectivity. And I mean, that must be a huge problem if you're immersing yourself and almost like not allowing yourself an escape.
Yeah, like I don't really get listening fatigue though.
Right.
I think is that more of a thing though when it comes to like the mix and like understanding what's going on in the mix? Because I do get confused in the mix. But for example, when I'm making, I find that it's either doing something that interests me or it's not. There's no kind of, I don't really have those qualities when I'm making. I'm mainly making, by the way, as well, because even though I'm mixing as I'm making, I never have these kind of like classic mixing fatigue moments. It doesn't mean that things are always working for me, but I just don't have that kind of a thing. Probably because I'm already annoyed with other things, and they're taking over my mind. But yeah, I don't know.
Well, it sounds like you're composing is the point. And I guess when you're composing, you're really focused on what's next.
Yeah.
And that is different. I mean, I'm sure that I'm sure will mix as you go. Like everyone trims the levels and, high passes that a little bit because it obviously needs to be high passed and stuff. Sure that those things are true for you, but
Yeah.
I think it's very healthy if you're going to be involved with any aspect, is to just be involved with the composing side. And I think it's dangerous with things like Ableton Live. It's tempting to get stuck into kind of loop mode where you stop with the gas comes off, the foot comes off the gas when it comes to adding new parts. And then there's a sort of natural moment where you have to move from these were the ideas to now I need to actually structure them. I find myself I find it hard. I will get into, I'll write, but then I'll get into a stage where I'm just sort of playing back all the parts and just kind of listening and reacting. But I'm not moving it forward. And I suppose it's how do you get to a point where this is finished? Do you consider yourself you're obviously a starter, but are you a finisher? And do you force yourself to finish things?
Well, I do find it difficult. I think everyone does. Obviously, there are times when things just naturally present themselves in a certain way as a structure that just feels quite legitimate, and you can just then enjoy refining that. But yeah, I find it very difficult. Like I say, because I have many ideas, and that the many ideas actually are about restructuring things.
Right.
And again, I'm talking really simple, just like maybe this happens here now, or maybe it happens later in this version, because there are so many ways that you can just rearrange simple aspects of structure. And the way that I write music often, because it's not really loop based, there obviously it is on a level, but it lends itself towards being restructured in different ways for me. Because I tend to improvise many different parts. There's many kind of parts that are quite rigid, and then there are parts that are quite organic and overlap those. So there's lots of, you can create the sense of illusion that things can go in different orders instead of you really perceiving a more loop-like structure to everything. So when it comes to finishing compositions, it just takes me a long time. Like some of these pieces of music took me a year to complete, and that's purely out of hesitation, really, probably more than anything else, because arguably they could be finished very quickly. I definitely write huge amounts of music very quickly, and it could be 80% of the compositions done very quickly, but I do find it takes me a long time to decide that it's complete. And I'm not even talking about the final like details of like mixing and refining stuff. I'm actually talking about the general structure. I'm just trying to think of examples, because for example, this record's quite strange in a way, because all the compositions are super simple, that they could almost be played on a piano, and they've got very sort of simplistic verse, chorus, bridge, blah 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 sections to them. But at the same time, because lots of aspects of the sounds are different to that, it takes a long time to kind of resolve the sense of how things should be. I mean, like I said, this record was made in the pandemic. I think that did affect the way that I thought about music in general. I was the kind of person that was going out a lot and needed to go out a lot to have respite from making, and also, to go into music venues and perform as a way to refresh my perspective. So I probably lost perspective during this. And that's probably why the record has got a little bit even more of an introspective quality to it. And maybe like a slight vulnerability and sensitivity to it, which I actually like. But I do think things like that help you gain a better understanding of like completing music. I don't think you can make good art if you're always just like locked in a room. And I don't mean because of the ideas or the production, but I mean there's something about going out into the world and experiencing the things that are outside of what you want, that sort of resolve perspective in your own work. So yeah, it's just, and I mean, actually, to be honest, the bottom line for me is actually playing live. Then I really understand what's good and bad about ideas in my own work, and it can actually flip. So things that I thought were really important can be of no value, and things that I thought were absolutely like redundant can be really interesting to me in a venue. So, and obviously that's a luxury. Not everyone can like just walk into a venue and play stuff. But I would advise anyone that's like making electronic music, if they can, to play their music in different contexts, for like physical different spaces, versus trying to completely understand it in like in a bedroom studio or a home studio, because you need to. I think it's good to make yourself uncomfortable and vulnerable in the process of making and listening to your work, which is obviously not enjoyable, but it has to be done. But because I've done so much of that, because I've made myself so vulnerable over the years, there's always that going into the process anyway, as like a kind of psychological quality. But it is important, I think, in terms of completing stuff, to have that going on.
Do you mean so it's to really to take another person's perspective or get their impressions, the audience's impression, what they react to?
No, but the point is your perspective changes as soon as you're in a different context and you see other people. Everything
I see.
Your whole attitude shifts, and it will shift at all times. The same song in 20 different venues will behave differently. The same song in 20 different venues at different times will behave differently. You at different ages, it will behave differently. There's all these variables, but it's just the idea that you shake up the variables a little bit so that you gain a little bit of insight into things. It's, I mean, that's just my opinion. Sounds a bit dogmatic.
No, but I think it makes complete sense. It's like there's that sense that like I mean, I play live a little bit, but like I make videos that explain pieces of equipment, and I've spoken to people where I've discussed the fact that the things I make when I know there's a camera on me and I know someone will see it are different to the things that I might make when it's just for me, and there's an inescapable fact that like it's almost like the red light syndrome, but it's not like a bad thing. It's just that sense that because you know that someone's going to hear it, then you make it differently, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd like to think you don't, and it's all very authentic or whatever that means.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But obviously, what I'm talking more about, like even just playback of material. It can be performed live, but even just playback. The playback of material in a different context, things will be revealed that just can never be revealed, like in a studio scenario. So
and it's too late to do anything about it, or is it? Depending on your life.
That's what I'm saying. So for many years, I've had the habit of like trying stuff out live, and I'm talking not even at the gig, maybe just even in sound check, just to gain a little bit of insight. How does it feel? You can play something in sound check and think, oh, actually, sounds very uninteresting, sounds very flat, or it can be the opposite. It can be like, oh, this is actually really interesting, but I thought this was extremely, unimportant. It's just the way that things change, perspective changes, and obviously that's super subjective. But I've been doing this for the last like 8 years, I guess. Well, 10 years probably. Well, maybe 15 years. I mean, like in terms of like being in venues and trying stuff out. So it's informed a certain aspect of my thinking. But I do think it is important to do that. And it doesn't have to be in venues. Obviously, it can like be. I mean, the worst thing obviously is showing your friends your music, but
just say they like it. Of course, they're like, oh, it's great.
There's something horrendous about that, and I don't really do that. But that is a resort. That's a last resort.
When you put on your like mix for your mate and you watch their face, like,
oh my god,
that is a real trial by fire. Pitchfork got nothing on that.
I can't remember the last time I've ever done that, because I've always hated that, showing friends of mine my music, because I just feel like, well, for a long time I used to think that only I understood my music in a very teenage way. and I don't mean I thought it was amazing. I just thought only I cared about those particular qualities that I was trying to do. So to this day I don't really show my friends, but if
I'm sure they hear it.
Wow.
Well, they come to the gigs, obviously. They come to the gigs and watch you.
No, I don't. Like, that's another thing as well. I never want my friends to come to my gig.
Because then that's like the ultimate version of the audience is listening. And how does it feel?
Yeah, it's happened a few times, but generally I hate it. I only want people to go to the gigs that really like and are interested in the thing, which makes total sense. And the idea that people might be there and then just for some weird reason.
To help But I mean, they want you to succeed is the thing. So like, surely they've got your back, or do they?
I don't know, but it's just,
Uh-oh.
I mean, everyone knows this, like that makes, art, that showing friends is, or family even. It's just, there's a weird vibe going on there, but it can help the process because you become really uncomfortable. And like I was saying earlier, being uncomfortable is actually really helpful for decision making. Not necessarily in that moment, but if you just do it now and again to create a different average in your head, is my way of thinking.
Keep you in check, basically.
Yeah, a little bit, more of a refreshed perspective.
When you play live, what do you give yourself to do?
So live is kind of, I mean, it's always changing, but it's been a hybrid of, I would say, kind of like 50% mixing, because it's just me, and I've only got two hands, and I do like to constantly improvise on the Prophet, because I do have the identical setup in my studio as live, which is the Rev 2 going through these two pedals, and then I have a huge amount of flexibility of how I can shape those with a MIDI controller, with the XL MIDI, the Novation XL MIDI controller with the
Is that
faders.
the little like one with? Oh, it's faders, is it? Not like the
It's
one with
kind
like
of
coloured dials.
it's kind of yay big. Wait, can I show you? I'll show you. It's try not to smash everything with these headphones.
It's like the old. Oh yeah. So it's the one with like, you've got like the grid of like knobs and like 8 faders, and you've got the buttons at the bottom.
Yeah. So I have 8 channels of audio, not always running, but
yeah,
and lots of simple DJ aesthetics, sort of low cut, high cut, delaying stuff out, reverbs. But what I really love to do live is constantly ride the faders, which is obviously really obvious, but I mean to the point where actually, which is so stupid, but this channel, which is the Rev 2, which it actually says, I don't know if that can be seen.
Yeah, I can see it, Rev 2 with a green sticker.
I'm constantly riding this as I'm playing the synth. So I'm basically always playing with one hand, but I'm always, so if I play for an hour and I'm generally playing the synth a lot, I'm constantly like shaping the volume of the Rev 2, which sounds super basic, but that's so powerful because it means that I can be extremely expressive. So for example, swelling, yeah, but also in terms of, for example, with the distortion, I can really make something disgusting with the distortion and then bring in a little bit of that, a little bit of grit, and then back it off, and then it's clean, just very fundamental, simple shaping of playing live. And then of course on top of that, I'm always with stems, loops, kind of playing with the structure of music. There's often lots of playback, obviously, because if I'm playing the keys, then I can't do everything. But there are really interesting bits where I can actually be extremely creative. But it's took me such a long time to get to the point where I feel that. To be honest, it's actually been in the last few years that I feel like I've only just started to get really confident live, and feel like I can do interesting things in the moment. And it's just took a long time to do that. I think because when you're producing, you're so obsessed with producing and making music that you often negate how things function live. But because obviously I've been playing live for many years, it's kind of just slowly crept into my general attitude about what can be done. But it is just dead simple, by the way. Everything I'm doing is dead simple, but the point is it's extremely playful.
You can like even the simple, as you know from mixing, it's the levels that things are, the volumes is by far the most important thing, and you can completely transform, because what you're doing is obviously giving focus to something that may on the record be a background element. You can suddenly bring it to the front and sort of expose it in a way that will be novel to everyone listening. So like, I know that little bit, but that, and only slightly hear it on the record, and then. And obviously you're pushing what people are interested in. As in, if it sounds good, you're pushing it forward. I don't know. It's sort of. When you sequence like live, how do you do it? Like, what are you thinking? Like, I'm going to make a more dancey thing, or what are the types of venues that you play in? How do you then craft like what you're going to include? And then, do you ever like remix things and like make them more dancey to suit an audience. If you're playing festivals and things, it might be what people want to hear. I don't know.
Well, so for the majority of the work that I perform, it is quite close to the structures that I've written as music. I definitely do like change quite a lot of tracks and make them perhaps a bit more.
The structure's a hard one, so you don't want to like mess them, as you've explained.
It's more because I'm so obsessive about the structures that if there are some pieces that I don't think I could do a better structural version of. It doesn't mean that they're perfect, but the kind of the whole of it is very powerful.
Yeah.
But there are examples where I completely restructure and make a little bit more of a physical, clubbier version of tracks, and also maybe to make them fit more within the set. There's lots of issues with my music in terms of tempo because I'm the kind of composer that writes from like 70 to 150 BPM. Versus someone that just makes 120 to 125 BPM. It means that mixing for me is actually, I'm more restricted what I can do, where I can go. That's other people would argue that's not true, but I feel there's a clumsiness going up and down in speed. So I tend to slightly speed up during the set, which sounds ridiculous, but I feel like it's the only way that I can negotiate the ideas that are going on.
Sounds good though. I mean, if everything slowly speeds up throughout the set, then you leave on a high, right?
I mean, and also, by the way, it's not really noticeable because it's extremely gradual, but it's just a way of negotiating the different ways that I've made music over the last sort of 15 years. But
I've just remembered it was Hudson Mohawk, by the way, he's the one who said like bounce out all of your stems and then you never lose anything. But no, you were talking about playing live. You were talking about what you give yourself to do, and the slow speeding up, of course, of the
different tempos. What's it about? I think it was about the changing making variations on the music for live. I mean, there's lots of flexibility because there are some pieces where there's huge sections that are just playing back outright, and then I'm improvising live with them, and then maybe bringing in new elements. But then there are pieces which are completely stem based and I can structure them live with the faders, as well as maybe bringing in a little bit of improvised synth playing.
That's fun.
Swapping them over. Yeah, it's just obviously the kind of fundamental things. And it's very creative, but you have to be obviously very careful in that context because I tend to be riding 8 faders in some of those situations, and it is simple. But
I can attest, you only got 2 hands. You're not an octopus.
Yeah, it's just fun because I like to actually, even like use the faders as like tremolo. So like you can just do little gestures with the faders and be creative with them in a kind of. I'm all about kind of having fun with the really simple aspects of studio production because I still think there's like a lot of magic there. Versus here's 40 granular plugins, and that's obviously amazing as well. By the way, I'm not a purist. I'm just for me, I just tend to, especially live, really enjoy just like playing with the volume of things, delays, reverbs, cutting stuff, blending stuff, just fundamental things. But I must qualify this though, actually, because the stuff that I've already kind of like curated into this already has this in mind. So in a way, it is a lot deeper than actually me liking those things. It's more like I've created a system of material that naturally lends itself well to these kind of processes. That's probably important to think about if you're playing live. I only have stuff.
I do like sick DJ cuts with your sort of Stockhausen.
Yeah, Stockhausen. Yeah.
I mean, you could try it, but I mean, like,
he would probably like it.
He probably would, and I mean, he was just stuff with filters, right? I mean, so that's. But like the 50 band sort of
pure academic.
Stuff. Yeah, of course,
academia. But yeah, anyway, it's just simple stuff, but it's very.
But I mean,
very
like, is you saying with the with the moving of a fader and like wiggling and creating a tremolo? I mean, the reality is that's something that people can perceive as an audience, can see the wiggly hand, like Ryan's hands wiggling, and they can hear the wiggling sound. But like a granular plug-in. It's like the audience has no idea.
I cut out a little bit then.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Sorry, I'm just letting you know.
Sorry, lost you for a sec. Yeah. I was going to say, but yeah, like the thing is, like if an audience member can see your wiggling hand, and it's like Ryan's hand's wiggling. I hear a wiggly sound. But if they hear like, you know, cloud rings into clouds, then there's just no perception of what's making it. I suppose if they saw you messing with a modular synth, then there's that's kind of an aesthetic and it's cool.
Yeah.
But I suppose it's that eternal problem that electronic musicians have, that what we do is imperceptible largely to an audience. And you could just be reading your email, but it's so very hard to strike a balance with that. And I think, do you have like visuals as well? Do you compose like and create a whole sort of visual component to your sets?
Yeah, we used to have visuals that I kind of programmed in Maximus P that were then performed live, which is quite interesting because it's not playback, that's actually completely generated live. But I by the way, in regards to like electronic people live, and should they be doing stuff, should they be seen to be doing stuff, I kind of don't care. Mainly because I'm so interested in ideas. So for example, if someone's doing stuff that excites me, I'm already happy. Of course, like we all want to be like struck by like charismatic performance. It's not like I want things to not be that, but I tend to be super open to electronic music, and the way that it's performed live. I mean, like for example, Autechre, who for many years have performed in like Pitch Black, even though ironically they're doing actually way more probably than most other electronic performers. So there's a kind of interesting contrast going on there. But
did you go to the Barbican, by the way?
I didn't go to the Barbican. I missed out on that.
I did not go either.
It's it's in my head.
I've seen them play, but at Brighton like a few years ago.
Oh, where was that? At the Dome?
It was. It's in that. Is it the pier? But near the pier. But it's like a very long room, basically, in Brighton. And like it was down like by the shore waterfront, but they played in the dark, and it was like it was incredible. It was like, and I remember, they started playing, and it's just like like an indescribable landscape of sound that you were hearing, and it was in the dark, and everyone stood there. You can see just enough because there has to be like emergency lights on.
Yeah,
you know, so there's a tiny glow, and you can, in the glow, you can see people standing, staring forward with their eyes open, which is a bit silly. And I thought, and then after a few minutes, it's like being at the dentist. I don't know, sort of a bit of a weird analogy, but you realize that you can close your eyes. Like you don't have to keep your eyes open. And so I realized I can close my eyes, and I just closed my eyes, and I was like, this is so nice. Like I'm really enjoying, and it's the ultimate expression of the fact that it's the music that matters, not anything else.
Yeah, and also I guess their music creating such detailed worlds as well makes it even more interesting because the senses probably open up more. But yeah, they're just a super interesting example, I guess, in all aspects. But I don't really have a fixed attitude about how electronic music should be performed or perceived. And I think maybe as time marches on, because more and more people make electronic music, more than ever, obviously, it's probably becoming less and less of a battle, because obviously there's this, like you mentioned, there is this sense that it should be recontextualized in the way that traditional performance is, or I think that's what you were kind of hinting at, which has been on my mind, by the way, for a long time, because I am a guitarist first. So of course I do feel sometimes there's this kind of fraudulent imposter syndrome thing going on, even though I made terrible music with bands, but I feel like I've made music that really moved me in the kind of electronic computer world. But yeah, it is an interesting kind of conversation, and there are obviously all examples of it. Like there are people that are super charismatic, like classic performers with electronic stuff, and then there are people that are like super IDM behind a laptop. It doesn't matter though if it's good, like no,
it really doesn't. I suppose it's just it just depends what you value, I guess.
Yeah, which is always changing as well amongst people. That's kind of what I'm trying to say.
Totally
like
is. And as you hint, like, you know, talking about how your music is perceived when you're going from different venues to different venues, I recognize in myself at least that like I care less. Sometimes I really care about the just press play thing, and sometimes I'm just glad to be out.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm glad to be here and hear their music on a big system, because that's also really nice.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with that.
It's sort of, I guess I've liked the occasions when I've seen bands where it's not even possible for me to tell what they're doing. I do find that helpful though, because then I have to just disengage this more technical part of my brain that's like, that understands how electronic music is made and is wanting to learn something from what they're doing. Like I went to see John Hopkins play, and like we were up high, and so I could see everything that he was doing, and I'm like, I can see how he's got everything organized, and I can see his like, you know, launch pad, so I can see how he's got his clips arranged and stuff. And there was a point where I kind of was like, it'd be better if it was in the dark, so I could just disengage that, or I was sat down below that I wouldn't be able to see.
Yeah, it's helpful to not always know, obviously, the process, but I mean, I think people, if they saw exactly my process, it wouldn't be that interesting, because it's more, I've created it in a way where I'm trying to just let the music breathe instead of forcing a really interesting performance aspect. Because if it turns out that I could do an amazingly like virtuosic performance and it worked with the music, I would do it. But I found that it's never ever been helpful, and it's kind of gone the other way and made things not interesting. So over the last 15 years of performing, I've just created a very simplistic, natural, well, not natural because that doesn't really exist, but it's just super flexible, basically. But yeah, it's an interesting world though. And also what's really important is to state is about sort of 7 years ago, I did decide to actually make electronic music with the Prophet 8. That's the Rev 2, but with the Prophet 8, and some pedals, and then take that live. Like I decided consciously, like, let me make with this set of things because it was working, and then I'm also going to take it live. So I kept studio, live was the same. And that obviously creates a confidence over years, and there's a synergy there, you know, versus if you're making and then live, you've just got a completely different setup. I did actually force and implement the same thing in the studio and live, not exactly, but the main ingredients. So that's important in my process. And I did that, by the way, because I was actually angered by this subject that we're talking about. I was angered by the weird, the translation from studio to live in my own work, not in other people's, but in my own work. So that's, I mean, that sounds so obvious as well, like, because anyone listening to this or who has done that would just think, yeah, of course, just if you want to make it easier, have the same setup in the studio and live. But some people overlook simple things like that.
No, I don't think that's obvious. I think it would be way too easy to like
do
it in a or to just do it in a completely different way. How am I going to do this and try and make it easier? But no, that's true. If you can, I suppose why not? It just depends if you can play stuff. I mean, I don't play the keyboard like you can play the keyboard. So
yeah, but that's got better over time though. For example, when I first started doing it, I shouldn't have been doing it because I wasn't that good at it. But you know, I've been doing it for like 8 years now, playing keys live. So I've got way better at doing it, and more confident, and you get more expressive, and you learn new things, and those things go into the music making, and vice versa. But I'm a believer in just doing instead of speculating. And yeah, just obviously keeping things simple is going to help generally, because there's already too many options in the computer world anyway. I'm not a subscriber to live performances having, you know, hundreds of plugins. Not to say that doesn't work, but it's just the idea of that would confuse me and probably confuse a lot of people. So I think try to achieve as much as possible with less things.
I often, like, as I'm sure you know, it's like the fact that less often sounds bigger, especially with synth sounds. Like sometimes like one oscillator sounds bigger than 3.
Yeah. And also it's more flexible because you can add or subtract from that in a way that it's very confusing if you've got a huge array of channels and stuff. Although, to be honest, I'm contradicting myself because there are bits in my set where it becomes extremely dense.
But not all the time.
No, just in moments. But because I do exploit kind of like almost a density which is like not necessarily desired as an effect, like to resolve into clarity. I tend to do that live, but yeah, it's just I mean, you could have a whole conversation just about what
it's always so good to have contrasts in live sets. I feel like there's when you've got it's so dumb, but like a really quiet bit and then a really loud bit. It's just like
I'm always trying.
It's an easy thing to forget to do.
Yep. No, I agree, but I do definitely make a big effort to have lots of contrast. Kind of all contrast really in my live set. Like density, sparseness, speed, heavy, light, ambient, just like all the different kind of like polarities I like to explore and kind of explore in my music anyway as well, like in general. But it's just obviously live, everything's much bigger. So even the ambient, soft, delicate bits actually have a lot of presence. So that's interesting because you forget that. I mean, or you wouldn't know that if you'd not tried to play your music in certain spaces. But everything changes. That's what I'm saying. Like the behavior of everything changes, the sense of everything changes. Things that you thought were small all of a sudden are actually huge. I'm not. By the way, I'm not saying this to you because you know, but I'm just saying to anyone that's listening, maybe that didn't know that or experience that. Yeah, that might be helpful knowledge.
What is this? What's in your Eurorack system that's behind you?
So the Eurorack is, I've got the endorphins complex oscillator.
The further with that's five. Great. How many R's is it? 5 or 6?
I can't remember. Yeah, but it is that one, which I love. I think that was the first oscillator that I got because I've basically got a whole bunch of stuff like sort of typical Doepfer filters, the Wasp filter.
Yeah, it's a great one.
The SEM filter, SEM chip. I can't remember.
A105.
I've got the
Diamond.
Oh, I really love. Oh, I forgot the name of them. Is it the Czech Republic company? Is it
Chaos Devices? Is it Chaos? XAOC.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I've got their.
I think it's pronounced Chaos.
Yeah, I think you're right. I've got their. Is it Butami?
Batumi.
But that's right.
The quad LFO.
I love that. That's there, and I've also got the 4 envelope thing.
Zadar. Is it?
That's it. Yeah.
Zadar.
I'm not even looking behind because you've got the knowledge.
This is just like stamp collecting for me.
Yeah. No, but
that's good.
I think they're incredible. That company. I really like those 2 things.
What like resonates for you about the modular, particularly?
I mean, I think I definitely have found it difficult with the modular because I love sculpting and modulating and experimenting with sound, but I do tend to get a little bit itchy about wanting to like write stuff in a certain way. Like I've got into the habit of playing keys. I mean, of course I can play into this as well, but I just haven't. I use the Stilson hammer sequencer on that. But yeah, I don't know. I think a part of me is a little bit too traditional in a kind of brain dead way. So I mean that.
You're not willing to experiment and go full.
Well, yeah, I feel like I restrict. I'm a little bit inhibited sometimes when I'm using that, and I need to learn to not do
loosen
that.
Up. Yeah,
loosen up and just. Even though the funny thing is, I've spent a lot of years of my life studying the most experimental music of all time, and have made really experimental music. I mean, like the weirdest stuff ever. But for some reason, I think I have quite a traditional attitude. In me about music, in terms of me making, not in terms of me listening or as a fan, but so that's been difficult. But there's lots of interesting stuff on the record that's been made with the modular. For example, in Echoes, in the sort of first half of Echoes, there's a kind of weird, almost guitar clicky sound that's made with really weird modulation going on in a system there with like 40 patch cables, even though it's a kind of just like a 3-note chord, but it's such an unusual clicky, almost like a Fender Rhodes guitar sound that's going on. So there's lots of little moments where I've captured really beautiful, like timbres that have then become collaged into compositions.
And by the way, when you're doing something like that, have you got the tune to a point where it's you have the tune in front of you, and then you're like, I need something to go here, to go in this bit. I'm going to go to the modular and just spend a couple of hours making something bonkers that fits it. Or is
No.
that just like, did you just have that modular jam separately and you just pulled it in?
That started that piece of music, actually. That sound
Right.
started it. The way that you're describing it is actually the more ideal way that I should work, but for some reason, I just have too much material anyway. So a lot of things that I've created with that have actually been the starting point for songs or the starting point for a section.
I'm smirking because like what you're describing, I think is like what modular is really, really bad for is like adding something to something that already exists and going,
right,
we need something to go in here, and you're like, cool. So I've got an infinite amount of possibilities in here. Let me just just negotiate infinity, and I'll bring it back to something really. When what you really need is like just go to an SH 101 and just play something really basic. It's just like that's great, but like it's like as an example, it's things like eventide, like really mad like eventide things that you get in like the pitch factor and stuff. You know that one, like there's some amazing sounds that it can make. Really amazing.
Wait, is that modular?
Or no, just the the little red like eventide pedal. It's just all.
Oh, pitch. I see what you mean. Okay.
So, but I just it's an example because there's so many great sounds it makes. But I remember thinking, I'm like, I love this. I love what it's doing. But there's no way it would ever fit a track. You have to make the track around that sound first. And I think that a lot of modular is like that. I definitely have done that myself. Like the only times that I've ever been really like productive with a computer in a modular computer here is that it's where it started it. And actually what I've done is done a jam and then turned it off, and then I just focus on the computer and chop up the jam and add things in a controlled way. And it sounds a bit like that's because I bring it up because I think it's obviously a perennial thing, as you well know, and as people listening will know, that finding a way to make modular not a colossal time hole and rabbit hole is hard. And yet it's one of the most open, expressive, infinite ways of generating sound. It's like one of the most versatile things that you can have in a studio, but it's also really hard to make use of.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and also, I think it depends though also, like I say, one of my issues is probably that I'm a little bit too traditional in my outlook sometimes. But of course, you've got people that are just doing incredible stuff with modular synthesis and being very kind of pragmatic about it and just creating record after record with just the modular system.
It's almost like what you said sounds pragmatic to me, that if you can approach it with a more traditional mindset, at least you've got a clear direction, and you'll probably you won't allow yourself to go too rabbit holey. You go like, I know why I'm coming to this machine, and I know what I'm coming for, and I'll get it or close to. And then that's the trick. It's not getting led down this sort of path.
But I think it's fine to be led down the path though and do weird stuff. It's just it depends on the individual. Like for example, I think you need to. I think anyone that makes music needs to spend a really long time with any given kind of vocabulary to know how to write with it. So, for example, if I just start, or anyone just starts making experimental modular synth sounds tomorrow, my natural opinion is you need to spend a few years with that kind of vocabulary, because after that, then you'll really understand how best to write with that. So, I guess I need to basically just really commit and spend a long time with it, is what I'm saying. And obviously other people do that, but what I'm saying is I've kind of not probably put in enough time to justify my understanding of that world, even though I understand a lot about synthesis. And I'm obviously, when I'm even doing stuff with the Rev 2, which has got quite a deep modulation world within it, there's obviously a connection between what's happening from that to the modular world. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. I do notice people all the time on like Instagram who are doing really beautiful textural, compositional, interesting things with the modular in the modular world. But for some reason, I never immediately gravitate towards using it to express myself. But I'm after this record though, I'm gonna spend a lot of time with it and see what happens, because I definitely feel like I can do good stuff with it. I think I just need a lot more time. I think everyone needs a lot of time with modular, actually, though. I don't think many people just jump straight into it and really have an intuitive. And I don't mean, because there's a difference between understanding and sort of and liking and feeling like it represents what you want. Because you could understand everything you're doing, but it can not resonate with you. Because I'm always wanting to be moved, or not always wanting to, but I try to be moved by the things that I'm making. So, that's going to obviously take a long time with such processes, because there's a lot of randomization. I mean, there doesn't have to be. There can't be. That's the problem. Everything that I'm saying is skeptical, because obviously you could have like a very classical procedural process in that world. But anyway,
I guess
I'm rambling now.
No, but not at all, because it is like, especially if you go to like a Stilson hammer, it's a very abstracted way of making music by like adjusting dials and changing probabilistic processes. It's not the black and white keys of a Prophet that there are shapes that your hand knows to go to, and the know will push your buttons in a certain way. And if you just adjust the cutoff and tune the oscillators, and just so I know that you know exactly what's going to happen. It's not like that at all on a modular. It's just like it's like fumbling around in a sort of, in a kind of Jackson Pollock painting and trying to find your way out. And it is true that like it is capable of amazing stuff, but with sequences, even ones that are quite simplistic, and even ones like things like Metropolis and stuff that I really like, it's still not every melody moves me, and it does take time. It's so weird when you find the ones that do, when you think about why the fuck does like a sort of tuning of like, why do like this sequence of tuned notes actually make me feel something? It's so weird.
And why can't it be recreated all the time?
Yeah. And why is it different? Sometimes I don't feel it when I listen to it. It's like, sometimes I do. It's like, the whole thing is very odd. Also, that there's grammar to music I find really odd.
Yeah.
That phrases resolve.
Yeah.
Has that been studied? It's not something I've looked into hugely, but the fact that there's a kind of call and response, and that, it almost, if you don't resolve a phrase, it's almost like agonizing.
Yeah, I'm kind of obsessed with phrasing, by the way. That a lot of my emphasis on writing music is about like paying attention to like phrasing, the phrasing of melodic, harmonic, rhythmic parts. So I kind of into that world.
No, please answer my query. Can you answer my query?
I mean, I don't really have like
I don't know
specific recipe or attitude towards it, but I just really prefer to anything that I've done that I thought was good had good phrasing, as in it was extremely like considered, like what fits into different, to explain, what's in certain boundaries, and before it repeats, just the same, same as a really good loop. A really good loop is a really good loop because it's probably the phrasing of it is very immaculate versus it being a different way. But anything can have good phrasing, but
not every process lends itself to it, I suppose. I just immediately think of an example which I've mentioned before on this podcast, but there's an app that I got called Synthesizer, which... Synthesizer. Do you know that one?
Remind me of that.
It looks like this. And it's like, but it's really simple. All it is just notes. It's like a monome, it's a grid, but it's constrained to scales. And the key with it is it's got a really nice 2-oscillator synth engine. It actually sounds really good, even though it's a phone. And it's just 32 steps. And you can add a bit of reverb and delay, but that's it. And so what happens is that if you sit on a train with that, because it's just a 32 bar note, and because you can't add 32 note sequence, and you can't add anything, then all you can do is make a really nice phrase.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the magic for me.
It is. It has been like
that, and that's kind of refers back to what I mentioned at the very beginning, which is when I talked about the velocity sensitive arpeggios on the Rev 2. Because it's velocity sensitive, interesting phrases emerge versus if every note was the same volume. You perceive phrasing, but it would be very static. I'm interested in very distinct, noticeable like a shape or a behavior to a sequence of notes.
Yeah.
And maybe like it's just loud at the very end of a sequence, you know, like different gestures. And obviously this stuff's like really been done to death, especially in like even like techno or whatever, where it could just be a loud as fuck note right before the one every two bars. You know, this kind of stuff on melodic terms is really powerful to me. And that, to be honest, actually, that's stuff that is very natural to achieve in the modular world. Interesting phrasing, like what you just showed on the phone.
Yeah,
So,
it's although it can be the trick with the phone is that you are forced to refine it. Like it's
yeah, and not
whereas in the modular it's left to chance, and it's kind of like you roll the dice and you roll the dice and you roll the dice. But on here you really have precise control, so that you it's like polishing a jewel. You really have to. You just keep polishing until it's really shiny. And the key is, because you've got nothing else to listen to and sort of distract you, is that it's all about whether it's all about whether you can make a loop that can play forever and you don't get bored of.
yeah.
And that's like the ultimate loop, really, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's like the ultimate sort of
I mean,
riff.
that's difficult to achieve, but
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know if I've ever done that.
I'm sure. Well, get synthesized. There you go.
Yeah, I
Sack
will
off
try
that
that. I will
profit.
try that. Yeah,
It's really
yeah.
good.
Sell everything. Just
Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. Jesus. I'm not on commission for synthesizer, and it's only like $4.99, so it's probably like the cheapest thing I can possibly recommend. So I have one final question, actually two questions. The first question is, what is the best console?
the best console. I'm not a knowledgeable console person. I mean, I guess
just
Neve.
wait a sec.
You'd say Neve. Oh, as in a gaming console.
Yeah, I thought that's why you call rival consoles, isn't
I
it?
thought you meant like as in like a classic console like Neve or SSL.
It's probably neat. But
I don't know. I was like a Nintendo guy as a kid, and then
you a Nintendo household.
Well, to be honest, my brother had almost everything because he was obsessed with gaming.
Well, we're talking
like Sega Mega Drive.
Yeah.
Nintendo,
I was thinking of your age. It's
PlayStation.
This conversation is either it's Mega Drive or SNES.
Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, I remember the Nintendo 64 really, really well. It's been amazing with GoldenEye and things like that, Zelda.
Yes.
But I'm also into PlayStation. This is funny because this is probably going to trigger a lot of people. Is
that why you call rival consoles? Because of like the whole thing of like Sony and Sega and Nintendo. I interpreted it like that way, but
I mean that's what you would think. Yeah, I'm trying to remember because it was so long ago, but I don't know if it was as specific as that. I definitely like the word rival because it implies, rivalry, and it implies more than one. And consoles was probably used because this, but also because it was connected to like the idea of technology in general. I didn't really have this specific like. It sounds like it's appealing to the super nerdy, gaming world, which I've actually got back into, by the way. So I'm part of the gaming world again now.
In what way, shape and form?
Well, I was playing Elden Ring too much.
I've got that game. I buy games aspirationally because I don't have time to play them, but I just buy them because it makes me feel like I will have time to play them.
I mean, that's a game where you can spend far too many hours, so that's a warning, and everyone agrees with that warning.
It seems like really like I have got Elden Ring, and it is just like aesthetically astonishing and incredible and strange.
Yeah, it is amazing. It's an incredible kind of cinematic experience to play, and the music's actually amazing in that.
Is it?
Really, 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 really interesting. Some super, super minimal, really minimal, tiny background, fragmented, like wispy string stuff going on. That's always really powerful, as well as like the heroic, bombastic grandeur. But yeah,
I also love that it's nails. It's like really hard. Like
it took me about 100 hours probably to get actually like to the point where I feel like it wasn't annoying the hell out of me. That's how. But it's because I've never played that From Software game before. Oh, no, that's not true. I tried to play Sekiro. I don't know if you've ever tried to play that.
I haven't tried that one.
That's
heard of
the hardest. It's too. I had to abandon that because it was destroying my.
It's making you angry.
It's just because I'm not like an actually good gamer, so it took me too long. But Elden Ring was good. That's my official endorsement of Elden Ring.
Boom. The rival console winner is Sony.
Yeah.
Well, assuming you're playing on a Sony.
Yeah. Yeah. What's placed? Yeah. Is that
There you go.
all consoles? I can't remember. I think it is.
I think I don't know. I feel like it's.
I don't have it.
I've got it on PC, and I've got a Steam Deck, which is like the sort of Valve's thing. Have you got one of those?
No, but I know of it. Yeah.
Should get one. They are really good. It is great aspirational console for people who really feel that they're like, oh, this is the way I'll be able to play games.
Yeah, I mean, we're always having to. Oh, you've got it there.
It's like so
it's like a little bit bigger than like a Nintendo Switch.
It's loads bigger than a Switch. So it's mad. Like the Switch is like this, almost like this.
Oh,
big.
Right, fits into basically
massive.
the screen.
It's massive.
What is that like? So, 9 inches across or something? The screen.
I think
it's pretty. Yeah, it's long, isn't it?
It's big. Like I have reasonably normal. I'm like 5'11", normal hands. But the point with it is that it's a PC in a handheld console, so you can. Interestingly, because this is we're music-y people, is you can also, it's running like Linux, so you can run Bitwig on it, you can run VCV Rack.
And you have?
I actually have run Bitwig very briefly, just as like a proof of concept. And also you can run Orca. Have you seen that? Like
Orca.
That's a fun one. So Orca's like, it's a graphic programming. How do I even describe it?
Basically,
no, yes and no. Like it's basically a sort of beautiful, like bluey green screen with lots of like it's all just text, and there's just lots of little dots in a grid. And basically, you write characters like Y, B, and Q and Z, and each of the characters is like a module, and it does something. And there'll be like one that is like I've like used it barely, so I'm going to get this wrong and annoy Orca people. But like one is like a emitter, and it'll emit a note every sort of like 5 beats because you put a 5 next to it.
Okay.
And the notes like run along in a little line, and then you can put something that gets in the way of the note and does something like trigger an event or like move the note somewhere else. And basically you build these little like structures on the screen that are actually sequencers and like note generators and have probabilistic things, and you can have it, pipe it out via MIDI, and it could be controlling your Prophet and making like sort of generative beats and sort of odd things. Orca, ORCA. And it's like, I think you can download it for free, but they're like, please pay me something. And so you pay what you want, I think.
That sounds good.
It's really cool.
I really like the sound of that. It sounds really...
Definitely recommend.
Unexpected results.
And also with this, because it's it's like a PC, then it's got, a USB-C.
Yep.
You can plug I've had a breakout and then like a little MIDI, just a little, like one of those, super basic MIDI, like cable MIDI adapters. So then you can have that be like an actual hardware sequencer.
So it could be used live.
Yeah, could be. Yeah. I mean, it's like, more just like, I don't know. I mean, it's a bit ridiculous sort of make music with this when I've got like an amazing Mac and stuff, but it's just one of those like sort of, it's the kind of thing, if you're a music-y person, you want to play some games, you are also going to think about can I do other things with it? And that's unique unlike a PlayStation or like a Switch.
Yeah.
Although there is like Core Gadget on the Switch, which is quite good.
Oh, I didn't even know that. I mean, I've not got a Switch, by the way, but...
Yeah. Well, it's that Gadget being you can get it on your phone, and it's on the Switch as well, and it's good. Like, you can make, like, legit things on, I mean, all of these devices. And I guess it's that thing of, with your phone, it's the camera that you always have with you, so it's the best camera you've got. And similarly for doing sketches and stuff, I've got a lot out of the phone, but, yeah. It's weird how I just come back to that synthesizer thing. What is shocking to me is that I've actually written better music than a lot of what I've done on Ableton Live.
Yeah,
and they're just little riffs.
But do you then reuse those in different ways in the computer, like just as MIDI maybe, or
not yet? But
it sounds like you should though.
Yeah. No, I like genuinely feel that probably the most important music I'll write is the stuff that is this, which then transferred out into Ableton Live and then finished as a piece. Because as you say, it's that the focus on phrasing that you explore. And that is the most important. I think you're right.
Good phrasing is powerful, that's for sure.
Yeah. So I have one final question. What is the future of music technology?
I mean, isn't the present and the future just everything all at once? Like, I mean, of course, I guess people would say that the future of music technology is more AI integration. I have like things that I want to be the future of music technology.
Such as?
Part of me wants sort of there to be a kind of movement in electronic music, and this is probably already happening, by the way. I'm contradicting myself now, but where it's just absolutely stripped back to the point of 3 people singing in a room with nothing. You know, like I would like the electronic equivalent of that as a whole movement, like 10 years worth of music of it, and there's loads of good stuff, there's loads of terrible stuff, and like I say, that's probably already happening. But
the simplicity thing, I really like that, like this sort of chamber music, but for a synth.
Yeah.
There is that. What's that? Have you seen that voix de luthier device? That's like a sort of, it's like a wooden, it looks like a wooden harp, and it's a sort of physical resonator.
Oh,
you plug a synth into it.
Yeah, it's like a reamp, isn't
it?
Okay, yeah, I think I've seen that. Yeah, didn't Heinbach demo that? Maybe
almost certainly. It's his up his Strasse, but it's like something. I don't know if that's part of what you're saying, but it's that idea of just trying to put a synthesizer into the physical world again.
Yeah, but not even do that. Maybe I was just even thinking, like, on a compositional level, maybe there'll come a point where people can express with new synthesizers of the future. This is so stupid now, but let's go with it because it's funny.
Please do.
The kind of things that you can express with the voice, the human voice, in a way that feels authentic. That's what I mean. And obviously that's subjective, but maybe AI kind of like synthesized algorithms will be able to lend themselves to that. Forget about what I'm just saying. It's terrible, but
I don't think it is terrible, because I think what you're getting at is like
it sounds.
What's key thinking about my like synth noodles is the fact that they're really simplistic, and it's the art of like writing electronic music without a beat that is just like selected ambient works too. Like those are good examples of what it's like. I was listening to the other day, like just like marveling at it, like my God, because that's good phrasing, and that's just like
very mature. Like, and he was like 20 or something.
Yeah, it's just like not okay, but that's fine. I'm glad for him. Well done, you.
Yeah, it is incredible. It's so mature and decluttered and elegant and all the good stuff.
And I think there's only 3 elements on some of these tunes. I mean, there's a load of quadroverb, but there's pretty much just 3 things. It's I think it is what you're saying, and I agree. Like, I think it should be a good challenge for any electronic musician to like limit the parts. Like, you've got 8 on your the 8 on your like novation is overkill. You need to like cut it down to just 3, or I don't know. I only say that like it allows one to focus. It's the classic thing with when you get into. If you've only ever made music on a computer and then you have a go at hardware music making, speaking personally, what I was like, the reason why people like this is the fact that you can't just add and add and add. You have to actually make all the elements work really well together. And then if for the next thing to happen, you just have to phrase things differently, create a new, stage of the composition that isn't just about bolting something onto what is already there and just sort of making this kind of Heath Robinson tune that's just things bolted onto things. It's about really working the internal guts of a song and reworking it from moment to moment. Songwriting, I think, is probably what they call it.
Yep.
But it takes limiting your amount of channels, available channels, to make that happen. So I think you're right in that it would probably be a very healthy thing for many of us to do. But I think you write very good, simple music. So it's sort of, but yeah,
I don't know if I do, but I'll take it as a compliment.
Exactly. It's yours. I'm going to start an Ableton Live set with just 3 channels on
3
it.
channels.
Yeah.
Could be a good thing actually though. Like every, 2 days a week, 3 channels is like a rule. I've never actually done that, but even I'm quite into that as an idea.
Like the 4-track is like overkill.
No, 4's too many. 3, it has to be 3.
4? What am I going to do with all those channels?
It's good. Yeah, limitation obviously always interesting. Even if you don't get what you want, you'll probably learn something that can be integrated into, a big composition as a way of thinking.
Why We Bleep is also sponsored by Modcaf. Now, before you pack away your patch cables and kiss your oblique strategies goodnight, let me tell you a tale of community, of a guy called Adrian Utley, and of an ancient wind tunnel. Now, the community interest company Modcaf has inspired 23 modular cafe Aldershot artists to record an ambisonic album in a very unique space. A historic Q121 wind tunnel in Farnborough, Hampshire. And at the end of September, there is an event that you can go to where you too can witness the unsettling majesty of a 58-metre-long concrete box being filled with sonic wonder at the hands of some mildly caffeinated experimental musicians, and of course, Portishead Adrian Utley himself. You can spend a weekend exploring this incredible acoustic space, experience live audiovisual performances, build your own noise synth, and engage with a community of synthesizer enthusiasts at a modular cafe, all while surrounded by artifacts of aviation history. Keep that Brystronica energy going on Saturday the 30th of September and Sunday the 1st of October 2023. Tickets to this awesome event are available at modcaf.org.uk, and you can catch up with the project at MODCAF on YouTube. Get tickets and go and enjoy some very long reverb tales. And now, back to you, Mr. Melodies. Thank you, Peter. Yes, thanks. Thank you, Modcaf, for sponsoring that. And yes, thank you, Ryan from Rival Consoles, or Ryan who is what Rival Consoles. I really enjoyed that conversation with him. I've thought about it a great deal subsequently as a kind of like a peek into a very private creative world, I suppose, which all these conversations are. But I suppose I was just really struck by what he said about the prolific nature of the music he writes and the sort of obsessive, process that he's been able to absorb himself in, just completely and utterly absorbed in this process of making music and trying all kinds of things out experimentally. Amazing. It's wonderful that it's possible to do that. I suppose I just come to that. I'm in a weird place personally, where I've just set off and left normal working life, quote unquote, to work on my own creative projects. But so therefore, I guess it's amazing. It's that idea that you can actually just spend your days doing something creative and really, really plumbing the depths. It makes me wish that we did have universal basic income so that people who are into things like music could just completely absorb themselves in it, because it's one thing for me to have a YouTube channel which makes practical demos of music gear, but the devaluation of music has just made it so incredibly hard to be someone who can spend the whole days making music, weeks and months making music. It's just so hard. And as you get older, as you well know, it's so hard to find the energy and the passion late at night in the hour that you have remaining to do music. And so I guess what I'm saying is I'm jealous that he has that time, but that's his job and he's so successful at it. So more power, Ryan, and thank you for taking the time to talk to me. Should live electronic musicians be seen to do more at shows? And he's like, I don't care. Like if there's interesting musical ideas, that is all it is, that's all that's important. I'm happy. And of course, he's exactly right. It's something that we've talked about here many times. But, at the end of the day, no one gives a crap what you're doing. Like, it will look very similar to an audience if you are programming a whole modular synth versus, playing with a laptop. On the whole, like certainly depending on the structure of a stage, and if there's like a DJ booth and there's a little kind of like barrier up in front, could be that they have absolutely no idea what you're doing behind that barrier. So what difference does it make? All that matters is what is coming out of the speakers. And I know that's not true, because all that also matters is, your joy and what you do. That is the key, because especially if you're going to keep it going when you have very little time, very little energy, then it's important that you're passionate about it. But at the end of the day, what comes out of the speakers is what will make you famous, not how you do it. And that whole thing of playing live tells him what works and what doesn't. There's a sort of fear and terror in doing that, in baring your soul and seeing actually how an audience reacts to things. But it's an essential component of something that was lost during the era of COVID, where he had to become very introspective and wrote Now Is. That's like a COVID album. And he says, well, kind of implying that there's also almost to a fault, because he'd not had the opportunity to play things out. But I think it's a great sounding album. It sounds wicked. It sounds very deliberate and very considered, because we know now that he's just spent so much time considering it. So yeah, interesting as ever. I hope you enjoyed that. I, as I say, really enjoyed talking to you, Ryan. Thank you for taking the time to speak to me. And I'm sorry that it took so bloody long to come out. Promise I won't do it again, since this is now my job. So yeah, thank you for listening. Thanks. And a special thanks I want to pass to those of you who are listening who are Patreon supporters. Thank you. The presence of you is a significant part of why I would consider doing this job full time. And as I say, and as I beg, and I will say again, if you enjoyed this, please do consider signing up on Patreon at any level. It will help. It will help me put focus on the sort of other side of things. That's the things that I'm not getting directly commissioned to do. So patreon.com/Mylar Melodies. Yeah, thank you to Signal Sounds. Thank you to Thonk for being awesome sponsors. And thank you to Modcaf as well for coming in. Check out modcaf.org.uk. That event is at the end of September, when Machina Brystronica is on. And I will be there too. That is an amazing event. I will be interviewing Vlad Kreimer from Soma, all being well, if Vlad can make it over. And if not, then perhaps remotely. But in any case, I'll be there, and I'm going to be playing my dang modular synth and maybe a drum machine at the after party. So I hope to see you there. That's all. Sorry it took so long. Much love to you. I promise I will be back in a month with the next one. Watch the skies, and we'll see you next time. Bye.